can watch them, but I prefer to record by myself as well. Just to, that's better. That's our unit. All right. All right, so if you can talk, please just turn on your mic and just talk. You know how to talk. You have to click on talk, which is just underneath the video square or whatever you call it, the video window. So just, at least on my screen, it's just underneath the video window. So because I'm sharing the screen, you might be seeing two chat channels, mine and yours. I don't know how it works. I haven't been a student, so for a long time. So you probably know the problem. So just jump in when you want to talk, if you have a mic, Melanie, and so on. Otherwise, we might agree that you'll be just typing. Okay. So before we just go on with things I can talk about, how about if we could address some of your questions? Do you have some immediate questions, some immediate pains that we might actually start with? Everybody is joining the room. I just would like someone to type or speak about any questions that you might have experienced already early in the semester. Lexi, I was thinking that's yes, unless
no question. No question.
Okay. Yeah, I think that Monday 4 p.m. is pretty good for me. I have a research seminar on Wednesdays. I have something else on, I'm teaching ELA 200 on campus on Thursday. Then Friday, I can't remember what I have. I teach ESL, the load subjects, and here's my week. So Monday is practically the best day for me.
Monday works really well for me too. Thank you.
Great. And and Monday is one of those days that nobody wants to teach on, so I think I just chose the worst day, which is just, usually people have time, because on Mondays everybody just wants to go home. We didn't miss this class. We actually held the class, and I think that on YouTube you have a little recording of the class. No, we didn't miss it. I just got in late because I was sick. I was on sick leave, but I forgot that when I'm on a sick leave, I was sick, so I forgot about everything. So I didn't actually inform the students. My brain was absolutely not present. I came back from overseas, and I had a series of events that happened to me, but I'm pretty much okay now. So yeah, if you look at the announcements, I try to use announcements as an update. So even though you have we missed that on campus. Yes, we did. Yeah, we did. That must have been when I was dying. Anyway.
Oh gosh.
Well, anyway, I resurrected myself, so it's all cool now. Okay, so so basically what I wanted to say is, if you don't have any questions or immediate questions, yeah. Yeah, I was sick, then I got poisoned, and then I broke my lower back. So that was just one thing after another. But anyway, so I know, it's terrible. So what I wanted to do is basically summarize what we've done so far. I would like to see your little summaries on the discussion board if possible, because that sort of focuses everyone, and anyway, so that would be a good thing to see. So till now, so basically for this week I would have liked to sort of summarize the main points of module 1 and maybe move on to module 2 as well. We're a bit hurrying, but not really, we have plenty of time. But module 1, so in module 1 we were learning a little bit about literacy, right? So what was in module 1? We had some readings, we had some nice videos, it was cool, it's easy, pleasant, no big deal. Module 1 is just like a holiday. Module 4 is the worst. First module is just fine. It's just nothing. This is interesting. It's interesting to learn about the history. So this one is about this video with the mountains and rivers. It's well, actually not the mountains, it's the desert, right? So it's the video about the history of literacy. Now these two videos are stuck together. Look guys, I've been trying for years to shift the one with the desert down. Learn9 doesn't allow me, so they stuck together. So one is about something and the other one is about anything, something else. So just watch them, and can you actually share with me, just by typing or speaking, can you share with me what are the main points that you have taken out from literacy, from the reading so far? Is literacy a tool or a process? That's it. So historically it was a tool, and why not today? I mean, human beings, right? Human beings live through life, and then what do they want? They observe the world, they observe each other, and they have, I don't know, look, I haven't lived a million years ago, but I presume that someone saw a thunder hit a tree, there was fire cooked meal, it's as simple as this, and maybe by accident or maybe not by accident, people learn to actually control fire. So we create tools to ease our lives, right? We have tools, and literacy was a great tool, wasn't it? It allowed for a number of things. So if I have that video from University of Melbourne, where they talk about the history of literacy, how did literacy evolve? Anyone has seen that video? Do you know how the literacy evolved?
So essential to any...
I'm just trying to show you some things here. I don't know whether it's visible for you, but you can see these are shapes of things, right? I presume, well, I don't know whether all of them are fulfilling the same way, but this is probably money. This is not the tablets, this is probably money. But there were tablets as well. Oh, there's a tablet here, just one moment. Here's a tablet. All right? So when you see a tablet, what happened? People began to live sedentary lives. In the past, we used to think that it was the Sumerian tribes that were actually the first sedentary culture. that started growing wheat, and as a result were able to actually hunt as well as gather the grains and cultivate the earth. But imagine, none of us can do everything, right? So we are all sitting here talking to each other, and someone else is growing rice and potatoes so that we can actually have some food tomorrow, even though we didn't sit in the fields and we weren't doing the job. So what happened was, as people started to diversify the things they did in the community, they were also trading. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't believe it started 3,500 years ago or before the Christ, or 5,000 years ago or something. I think we were doing lots of interesting things a long time ago, but I don't need to go into this today because it's not a history class. But what happened when people started trading, and that's what he's explaining in this video, what happened was, like, you and I exchanged something. Kathy wanted some of my grain. I wanted maybe from Kathy some of her other grain, or maybe some bricks in order to actually build my home or something. And we started to actually trade. But the problem was obviously that we couldn't actually remember who owed anyone, who owed whom what. So we had to actually write it. And what they do find on those tablets from the past, they find, I don't want to call it primitive, but I can't think of a different word, because we're up ourselves in our 21st century, so let's call it primitive, because you all understand it, right? So they found all these primitive ways of actually, or markings of how to note who owns what, and who owes whom to what to whom. So that was great. But what happened at the same time, there was another innovation that happened, and I'm not sure whether I can find it here. Oh yeah, I am finding it. If you look at the first square on the screen, I don't know where the top tablets. The bottom ones I think are money, but the top ones, if you look at the top ones, you will start seeing that the tablets not only contain marks, but the marks are organized, right? The marks are organized. There's a clear order on those marks. So why do you think they have that order? Any idea why we have the order on those tablets? It looks like a table, right? So that was the beginning of information technology. When we started to actually we started not just writing and creating marks, but organize things relationally to each other. This is in relation to this in relation to this, and it was the beginning of information technology. We started to actually not just speak and not just create markings, but we started to actually create relationships between categories. Now, I spoke to someone today. Okay, my PhD student is doing a PhD in Indonesia, and she's teaching research methods. And the problem they have in Indonesia, I'm sure we have it also in Australia, is that students and the graduate students who are studying research methods, they hate the subject. They're bored, they fall asleep. And the problem, of course, is that the way that research methods are taught, which is the pedagogy of the subject, it's taught through abstract rules. You have this type of study, you have this type of study. When you do this type of study, then you have to do those particular things. You use those tools, you use those data analysis, measurement tools, all of that, right? Now imagine a 21-year-old kid is listening to this, all in English. It is all an abstraction. It's all an abstraction, it's abstract text. And when you teach people who have actually no practice in it, when you teach them abstract what you did, and I'm speaking this because you will hear the same story in module 4, so it's an introduction to complex pedagogical issues. When you teach people abstract terms, what does the word abstraction means? Which mean it means you abstracted some rules from experience, right? So animals might know, for example, what makes a good leader, what makes a bad leader. And clearly when one leader is a little bit of a terrorist or something, one day when the bad leader has a headache, they murder him and they put in place someone who actually has friends, respects females, might even groom someone else's children, right? So we all have this practical knowledge, but in order to name things, oh, these qualities make up a good leader. This is an abstraction. You abstract from experience, and now you can actually talk about the behavior in terms of rules or qualities and so on. It's a major cognitive step. But what happens, of course, in pedagogy, not just in research method subjects in Indonesia, but also very much in year 1, in literacy classes, in English classes in Australia, what happens is that we teach abstraction away from experience. Right? And we want students to understand what they never actually related to. Abstraction is the last step, not the first step. And that's the problem in Indonesia. They teach abstract rules, abstraction of an experience that nobody has lived as yet. So, but here you can see that not only that people created that step forward and they turned the word into a sign, but it is not just a word, but it's turned into a sign. It's a message, an important social message that is codified in a sign, which means wheat. We don't just we don't name everything. We just name things that matter to our life, right? Even the words we use are tools. Everything is a tool. We use these tools to manage our lives and thoughts. So they created markings, and then other than markings, what they did, they created another abstraction. We could actually create categories. So now into that category, we can put maybe, I don't know what, I'm not a banker, but we can have a category of months, July, September, October, right? So in those months, these people were paying us off this and this amount of money, so they owe us this much. Then we have a category of a month, we have a category of amount, how much of the total or what kind of type of goods that we will be accepting, right? So they started to actually create higher categories that included a lot of objects and were named as one. So the months, the payments, payments could be and then classified by different time spans, be it months, be it weeks, be it years, and so on, and maybe also the objects. Look, I'm not a banker, I don't really know the categories for exchange, but you can see we have tables here, and that was a leap forward. It was a leap forward because once we started to see relationships between abstract categories, then we could actually abstract further and further and further until we reduced everything to 0 and 1s. Why haven't we done it earlier? That's another lecture and not in this unit. So that's what was happening in this beautiful world of ours. That's what our ancestors were busying themselves with. So what did we learn? I mean, I can see that Louise wrote, yes, it is presented in this video as if it had started as a way of accounting, but I cannot claim it because it's just a story from the perspective of accounting. But maybe literacy had also other purposes before, but this person in this video is not taking that that into the account. I think before we actually counted who owes what to whom, I think that people were more busying themselves with relationships among one another, with stories, with myths, with gods, with how to manage lives, and they might have been having some markings on their bodies as well. Before they actually started marking the tablets, they probably were marking their bodies, and every of those, like even indigenous people, Papua New Guinea people, they still put markings on their body. Some of them could be just simply, whatever, but I think that a lot of those markings actually have a meaning. So there, and I think it would have been, the body painting would have been another form of literacy, and it was more holy and maybe more relevant before actually money and accounting actually came into play. But these are interesting things. So we have Seth Lloyd talking a little bit about Gutenberg's press and so on and so on. There is this belief that people in the past didn't read and blah, blah, blah. People always read. How do I know that? Well, because someone wrote an article for my book, and that's what they said. But I've listened also to some videos on YouTube, and people always read. Obviously, there was a large population of people who were illiterate, so they were entertaining themselves with oral stories. But whenever people could, and those people who did read, people read to each other, and people read a lot. And definitely before the Second World War, people read a lot. And the First World War, people read. That's why before the Second World War, there was this huge culture of this, I don't know what you call it in English, I forgot that word. But those silly novels that I think Jane Austen was producing some of them too, those love novels for women, especially for women, like targeting people, saying, especially females, those tragedies, he loves her, then he doesn't love her, then he left her, then she's, all that sort of stuff. There's lots of it. So that's what was happening. So we had changes in technology as well, and as we were changing technology, we were able to the price for the books or of text got lower, because I think I read somewhere that when Copernicus got his first book, or first and only book printed, the one that said that something is rotating around something else, the earth is rotating around the sun, that book was worth a house in today's money, right? One book, you could have bought one book or a house. So, but today, people don't have houses but have books, right? So the price was going down, and that helped to actually distribute more text, and therefore people could actually express themselves and start being actually heard. So that's a good thing. For module 4 and for assignment 2, we will be aware that even though people, or even for assignment 1, even though the technology was changing, it's very hard to create a social change. And education very often is about social change. And what I mean by this is it's very hard to change practices by which we live, even if we do have a very good reason. So what I mean by that, like the reading culture came out from the monasteries in Western Europe, well, in Europe, in Western culture or European culture. It's really hard to beat out from educational culture the practices that we had in those monasteries. One book, we read together, we answered questions. So the way people were reading the Bible, which was like one text in front of you, I think I have a video about it, or at least, not today, I'm not going to deal with it today, I'll deal it in assignment 2. But basically we had a culture that was centered around the book, one single book, we were reading the book had everything, and all we had to do is actually understand the book. And we had a guy in front of us, whether it was a priest or in 19th century Victorian teacher. She would make sure, usually she would make sure that we actually get the reading of the text right? So that our mind doesn't stray away from the party line. So we had that police of meaning and everything. So it was really good. So what else? What is literacy? I can't remember what I have here, but I think that in that PDF file or whatever I explained to you, I make one very important point that I think that most people don't make. I'll just go back to what one of you said here. Lexi said that literacy is used in many different ways and aspects. Literacy is used. Literacy is used. Yes, I guess so. Yes, it is. What's a differentiating aspect? What's a differentiating aspect regarding how we use literacy? What determines how we use literacy? The message is very clear in those texts that I have actually included in module 1. Are you guys there? See, that's what people talk about, because yes, culture, context, yes, but do you what is culture then, and what is the context? Okay, that's almost there, Lydia, but I have to, So can we have a dictionary of culture? And can someone learn culture like they, I don't know, can we learn the culture? How do we learn the culture? Can we read about it? And I mean, how do we learn the culture? Okay, so for example, where is this culture living? That's a good question. I borrowed it from my own mentor. He would ask you this question, so I'm just gonna give it to you back. Where are those ideas and customs living? Where is the culture living? Who is we? Do we have a global life? Like, So you mean that if I want to teach someone how to express themselves, I just give them templates, right? So people just, in a particular social group, I mean, I'm not saying you're saying this, but I understand where you come from. I understand that intellectual paradigm. So basically in the intellectual paradigm where people talk about groups, does this mean that the groups talk in terms of templates? There's a template for every expression or for every context? I like the idea we, but I don't think that there's a we. I think that I would suggest something else. I would say culture is a perspective from which you act and act on others, and from which you interpret your own actions. That's a good one. I'm going to publish that. Yeah, I'm just trying to type it here. So culture is a perspective from which you act. Not, I mean, doesn't matter how many, let's assume to what group, let's assume that we are all people, all Australian people, all born in Australia, and let's say that we are from a homogeneous social group. Let's assume we are from I don't know what that means, but let's assume we are from a homogeneous social group. Do we all have the same knowledge? Do we all share the same knowledge? I mean, how homogeneous do you have to be in order to be the same? So I think that all these theories about groups and identities and, you know, all these boxes and drawers, what they miss is an individual. I like the saying, but someone said on YouTube, I mean, there's a professor, one of the most important, he's here in Australia now. What he says is, so Jordan Peterson says that individual is the ultimate minority. Individual is the ultimate minority. So what happens is when we, doesn't matter how homogeneous to you might seem a group, you know, we're all from the same school, we have had the same experiences, none of that. Nobody is living, we might be intersecting as we meet, but the kinds of conclusions we reach from those meetings, the kinds of experience we build on the basis of previous experiences, and the kinds of understandings we draw from our experiences are not the same. That's why your best girlfriend or your best friend or your husband is so different, and yet your brothers and sisters, same parents, same everything, and so different. So I think I quite like the idea that culture is a perspective from which we act on others and from which we interpret our own actions. Because once it is a perspective, there is implied in this concept is the idea that you can expand that perspective. That's novel, right? You can expand that perspective. You can, and also what it means that sometimes maybe your perspective is too narrow. So literacy, coming back to literacy, what did I ask? What did I ask? What determines how we use literacy? So let's play with this text. What determines how we use literacy is used depending on the ways from which, let's say, the literacy is used depending on the ways, depending on the perspective from which we act on others and from which we interpret our own actions. I will make it very simple soon, but I just wanted to show you how when you have a good definition, you can actually now use it almost like a word and connect it with another word and see whether it actually makes sense together. So literacy is used depending, how we use literacy depends, right? So this is a bit badly written. So how we use literacy depends on the perspective from which we act on others, depends on the perspective from which we act on others. I hate that woman, so I will send her a birthday card to show, to be nasty to her, right? So from the perspective and from which we act on others and from which we interpret our own actions. I think it's perfectly all right to be nasty to a person if she deserves it. This is what I know about the world today, and this is what I will do. And I will send her a birthday card where I will make the point that she is fat. That's the birthday card I will choose, right? I know that from the perspective I live, that's gonna how I interpret the world. Telling her that she is fat will upset her. You know what? Not everybody gets upset by that, actually. But that's from that perspective. That's my action. So we use literacy. How we use literacy depends on how we enter into the cultural exchanges. Depends on the perspective from which we enter into those conversations in the society. All right. So one of the reasons why I'm stressing this is to start focusing you on the fact that we're not dealing with groups, we're not dealing with masses, we're not dealing with boxes of people, we're dealing with individuals. My student from Indonesia also said that when she just came back from doing her field work, she said people in Indonesia find it very difficult to comprehend that there might be a link between how the brain learns and how students learn. Well, I can understand that. The problem, of course, is how the brain learns, and everybody will tell you but what the neuroscientists are telling us. They're just telling us general sort of principles. But how a single person, individual person, does all of that, and they will say it depends on the associations that they create that individuals create in their own heads. So nothing is very simple, but there are certain principles that we should obey by. So I want to start putting into your head the idea that your students are individuals. And I know it sounds hilarious that I have to do it in the 21st century, but there's been so much talk and so much work about context and groups and, that to the point that we have lost the individual. And we assume that, when we come to the class, people should understand, people share, people do whatever. Well, no, they're just little beings there in front of you, not people, just little beings. Little beings, everybody different. And everybody putting together the culture, that abstract term, right? We created from our experiences, the ways in which we deal with each other, we called it a culture. And now, instead of understanding it's an abstract term that we've extrapolated from the experiences that we all live, not that we share them, but that we all live. We've extrapolated those experiences, we called it the culture, and now we decided to teach it as if it was an object. Now, that's not good. That's not good. So, and culture changes. How come that culture changes? If it was all about learning how to be in your social group, we wouldn't be changing. It would be all the same. There are lots of things that we still do the same way we used to do, 10,000 years ago. I can't think of one, but there are things that, we still do the same way because there was no need to change them. But how we live with each other changes because each of us, as we go through life, we put together in our heads a different story about the world. Each of us creates a story about the world in our own heads, and each of us does it differently. And as we act with one another, we don't act within the culture, we act and negotiate those stories with one another. And because each of us has different story, culture has this movement forward. Not because on television they showed, but now that we must be using this iPhone or we must be doing these things, nothing like that. It's because each of us has a different story. So consequently, we never actually reproduce anything. We always produce. So what's happening? We use literacy tools in order to participate in culture, in our lives together, in our context of life. But how come that we use those literacy tools differently? Yes, it depends. We could say abstractly, yes, it depends. None of you said it, but on the purpose. It depends on the purpose, right? It depends on the purpose, for example. And that purpose doesn't come from the context, doesn't come out from the context. It comes out, the interpretation of the purpose comes out from your little head. It's the most important. Oh my goodness, my husband has a birthday. I have to buy him a card, or I have to do something special, right? Everybody gives him cards. I'll do something different, right? You might be creating a poem. You could create a website for him. You could do anything. Point is, the purpose, and now how do you engage in that purpose depends on you. There is no template that says you must do this on the birthday for your husband. There's no template. So each of us enters our cultural lives together, and depending on the purpose and how creatively you want to engage in this purpose, you use different literacy tools. So purpose is very important, right? So we have different technologies. We've got different technologies. We've got now, if you read Calansis, we've got print literacy, but we also have different media, and I think that she's quite right to point to that fact. So we have different media, we have print literacy, and we have also rich culture that actually has already created a lot of production on which we can draw to when we want to do something ourselves, be it create an email or be it create a poem and all of that. I agree, we all learn that we are all very different and learn differently. Therefore, we need to teach its students' learning needs. Why is it then that there are standard testings? Should each student be able the opportunity to shine in their own way? Well, we will deal with that, Melanie. We will deal with this question in module 4. The truth is, neither the curriculum nor the standard testing is the enemy. It's how we do it. Okay? So you can still have exams, but it depends how you do the exam, and how you test, and how you create those criteria for assessment and all of that. Okay, so we have a story here, and what I wanted to do is from all these stories to give you a bit of an idea of technology, of a history of literacy and all of that. And there's here a video about Australian context, and this video, I don't remember what it is about, something about neuroscience, this video, so that's also very interesting. Now in module 2, I don't want to take all your life today with this class, but I wanted you to actually have a look at things here. And I wanted you especially to look at that thing about, I want to follow up what I just spoke about, the concept of purpose. Okay? So I want to follow up literacy, Literacy has this roots. Literacy is used with purpose, right? To produce holy marks on someone's body so that that person can perform a particular ritual, do accounting and all of this. How many weeks is each module? 2 weeks for each module. 6 modules, 2 weeks per module. Okay. But I think that kind of module 4 is really the biggest one, and the other ones you can do in no time. All right, so in module 2, what we have is a lot of articles or whatever. Just have a look, play with it, just use it for pleasure. Don't actually kill yourself with those things. I put them there for your reflection, for your stimulation, for sort of a bit of a fun. There's a paper by Ockerman, and a lot of students of mine actually quite like the paper. I know Marian Ockerman because she actually did some things with me in the past. Has any one of you actually opened it or read that paper? Okay, so people quite like it for many reasons. And one of them is because of the title. And another reason is because it talks to your, anyway, it's people relate to it. But I wanted you to see something here, what she does in this paper, and I would like to actually stimulate you thinking a little bit about it. So they have a situation here in this paper that students are reading a book. So I understand that this paper is about making students comprehend the text. Now, look, once I say it, don't take it as, oh yeah, this is how you comprehend the text. Don't do that. Just you have to learn a little bit. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there in the literature, a lot. There are a lot of people involved in research in literacy, and there are ban fights everywhere and so on. So what I want to do is to expose you to different ways of thinking, and I want to put some questions into your heads so that you don't just follow as you actually go to schools, but you actually have some information in your head, and you know, it's a good foundation. So basically, well, let's read a little bit. I observed this group. So in principle, we know we should value what students say. But what if a student completely misinterprets the story he or she is reading? A 5th grader, I'll call Adam, provides a case in point. Adam, who received special education services, was part of a pull-out summer school literature, this is America, discussion group, serving 7 struggling readers. I observed this group while visiting Adam's school one summer, blah, 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 blah. An experienced classroom teacher, I'll call Max, was teaching, facilitating this particular literature discussion group. During one discussion, Adam was reading a fable that opens with a sentence, "A miller and his son set off to market to sell their donkey, leading the beast behind them." Hearing the word beast, Adam hypothesized the donkey may be very mean, so they don't want to ride him. Because nothing else in the story suggests that this donkey was mean, many teachers would correct Adam by offering a definition of the word beast that made more sense, such as beast of burden. Even if they did not directly say he was wrong, they would evaluate his response in such a way that he would know it was wrong. But Adam's teacher, Max, did not step in to correct Adam. What I observed in the discussion shows how students can find their way to text-based critical reading, when an astute teacher resists yanking away wrong interpretations. In Adam's case, because the teacher did not step in, one of the other 5th graders responded directly. Thomas, Beast can mean a lot of things. It can mean like what Adam is thinking, big and mean and stuff, but beast can also just mean that he is big. Adam, I know, but they are selling him, leading the beast behind them. Thomas, yeah, maybe they need the money. And so on. If you read this article, you will find out here. You will find out here how these people, this particular people who, this particular paradigm or this particular perspective that Ackerman takes on literacy, teaching literacy and teaching critical reading. So you actually learn about this perspective. I want you to see it as a perspective. I don't want you to see it as the way to teach literacy, okay? Because, we know too little to get married to the first model that we see in front of us. So notice it that it wasn't the teacher who corrected, but it was the other student who corrected the student, right? And it sounds like, oh, that's really good, that's really lovely, it's better than the other students correct the student than the teacher himself. Well, sometimes it works, sometimes may not be actually so good, nobody likes losing face in front of other students too. That's another point, where they don't raise the issue, but it's about face, preserving face, and just as much as might be a face loss when the teacher corrects you, it might be even more a face loss when someone else corrects you, like your peers. So yeah, it's lovely, just a sort of motherly talk. But in terms of literacy, because I don't want to discuss so much pedagogy at this very moment, because that's not necessarily the issue at this very second. I said before that how we use literacy depends on the purpose for which we want to use it, and this purpose and how we engage with this purpose depends on individual interpretations, right? So the concept of culture that I spoke before about depends on our individual interpretations. So how we use literacy, sorry, I always misspell literacy. How we use literacy depends on the purpose for which we want to use it. So in this particular text, what's the concept of literacy that do you think Maren Ackerman is using? The kids are sitting there and reading the book together, and they try to make sense out of it. What's the concept of literacy? It's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. So what's the purpose? If you actually analyze what the purpose is of this activity, you will actually understand what's literacy. So if you go through the modules, you will find out that I talk about literacy as right. So it's about following our purpose, right? We choose literacy tools, and how we use those literacy tools depending on the purpose we want to actually effect. Yeah, well, I couldn't say it better. Exactly, Carol. To get the students to understand what they are to understand, right? to get the students to understand what they are reading, right? But okay, the thing is, and that's, you know, and these people, this is what they call the socio-cultural model, or also sometimes another model, but this is the so-called socio-cultural model. It's actually a Marxist model, but never mind. This is a kind of Marxist paradigm to literacy teaching. So what's happening is here, just like in Marxism, what happens here with this particular paradigm, an individual and his or her own desires disappear. They all sit, they all read, they all do what they're told, and they all are playing teacher's game. And the teacher thinks because kids talk to each other, that was really good, right? So basically it's a self-pleasing exercise of the teacher, because the teacher got the students do what the teacher intended to do. And the outcome is whatever the outcome is, but the outcome is not related to a specific student, which is something that Melanie was talking about here today in the class, right? Well, what about standardization? Has your Ania individual, the concern for the individual, balancing with the concern for standardized testing? It's a real question, and it requires an informed answer, right? So here, whereas what we have here, doesn't matter how I look at this methodology here, we cannot see that the reading itself, the reading activity we don't see, she doesn't say anywhere, emerge from the student's own engagement in the world. And one of the things that has to happen is recognition that children do not live in school. Children live in the world. Children who lived in the world, their experiences are from the world. When you deal with them in abstract terms and you force them to, did you understand the word? Did you understand the word? Can we discuss these words? What happens? Some kids will play the game, but some kids are wondering, what does this have to do with I haven't been with my friends my Australian friends for a while. What's the saying in English? What does this have to do with the price of rice or something like this? I can't remember. It's a sort of funny saying in English and Australian. Anyway, we can't see how the individual soul is engaged in this activity, right? We just see what kids do, and we can see what the teacher approves of. So the whole concept of literacy in this activity is about reading for, I know what you want to say, for meaning, but I don't want to say it because it's not for meaning. It's reading for exerting responses from students that after a while they will, reading to exert responses from students. Whether they really will understand it or find it meaningful, well, what does it mean, Melanie 529? Why are you typing 529? Right? So these...
Can you hear me okay?
What?
I'm right back at 529, see understanding the meaning of previous knowledge.
Oh yeah, okay, good. Very funny. Alright.
So when I use my microphone, everything goes fuzzy, so I'm going to switch it back off.
Yeah.
I'm getting echoes.
Yeah, so maybe someone else has to turn off the microphone because mine has to be on because I have to hear you, but someone else might need to turn off theirs. So if you don't use the mic or whatever, just turn off your talk. All right. So the pedagogy we will leave for module 4, but for now, and for today, if we learn that literacy, that the world consists of individuals, that individuals engage with one another in experiences, in activity, and they negotiate those experiences and activity depending on their own histories, personal histories, right? Oh my goodness, I have never seen this one before, a person says, and they say, yeah, well, now you do see it, right? Yeah. Okay, so even though we might be so-called sharing, the truth is that so many of us miss so much. we all miss most of the things, but that's another story. So we live in the world. We enter into relationships of different kinds with one another from a perspective of our experiences that are available to us at the given moment, because we're not machines, right? So when we actually choose to engage in literacy in print-based activities, we do that because we see a reason, and we do it in such a way that fulfills our reason. So we engage in literacy or in print literacy because we have a reason, and we do it in such a way that fulfills our reason. And if we actually complete our activity, and if it really does fulfill our reason, we get feedback and we learn what we did right and what we could have done better. And it's meaningful to us because we engaged in it on our terms. Right? So that's the sort of concept of literacy. We can talk about literacy in abstract terms, just like we talk about grammar in abstract terms, but nobody sane in this universe can say that verb, noun, and adjective, the way we talk about grammar, have a real existence in the brain, in the way how we talk about it. We use words and we use forms of logic to talk about processes, but how the brain really codifies these things, we would get a Nobel Prize if we really knew how it does it, right? So we can observe, oh, the brain now misses adjectives, or the brain now is saying this and that, but how the brain really codifies information, it's a mystery for now. So literacy is a good concept, but it's only an abstract that together refers to lots of activities, and those activities are not activities that sit there in a drawer. They are basically activities that people invent every time they engage in a literacy context. So if we watch a literacy class, what we want to actually understand is, has this particular class acknowledging the presence of individual students' experiences and goals in order for the teacher to assure that the student is actually connecting with the class. So if literacy is taught as literacy, then as an abstract term, we will have the same outcome as my student in Indonesia has, where everybody is bored and nobody knows what's talked about, and basically the literacy knowledge is taught by parents at home or somewhere else, because everything else is so disconnected from individual experience. So we cannot remove individual experience from the learning experience, because we're dealing with individuals. So we engage in literacies because we have a reason, and we do it in such a way so that to actually fulfill the reason. And then we ourselves, once we actually complete our literacy, to fulfill our reasons, we observe the impacts of that action, and in that way we get feedback and we learn. We need to observe the impacts of our actions to learn. The brain learns by getting feedback from its own actions. Actually, this is more meaningful and more actually true than you can appreciate at this very moment. But I'll just leave it there. So children read the text, whatever, but if those children, I'll give you an example. If we wanted to discuss the word beast, let's assume in an ideal world something good happened and now they have a discussion about the word beast. It could have been done differently. It could have been done differently. How else? Adam has a question about beast. Say, Adam, where else have you seen the word beast? I don't know. How can we find out different text where the word beast is used? We could go on Google, we could look in different children books, we could explore different texts and find different contexts, different impacts in which the word beast was used for different reasons, right? We could have what the brain actually is meant to do. Exploratory learning. Your brain learns through exploration, not through explanation. Right? Your brain learns by exploring. You have a circuit in your brain. That's why we like play. We have a play circuit. We also have a exploratory circuit. So if you have a rat, I think I spoke on campus about it, to students on campus. If we have a rat and we remove 90% of the brain of the rat will still engage in play and in exploration. But because we removed most of its brain, it will not remember the outcomes of its exploration, so it will continue on exploring, right? It will never learn. It will just go on exploring all the time because can't remember the outcome. But, so looking at one book to read the meaning from one book, and then, goodness gracious, nobody knows what words mean. Now we're gonna sweat, and we don't want a teacher anymore to point out the meaning, so we will use the students. What will you do when no student knows the answer? Oh, then the teacher. Why? We started our discussion today about the history of literacy, and I said that education is a social change. It's really hard to create social change. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. The balance should be there. What did I say? We continuously, we stick. But in the past, what people did, they had this Bible, they read the Bible, one text, and there was the first a monk and then a teacher who was beating the meaning of the Bible into students' heads, or the meaning of any text into students' heads. Either way, everybody was looking at the single text. In the 21st century, what do we have Maren Ackerman saying? Children are reading the text. They have one text in front of them. They're reading just that text, and they're thinking about that text. And the only resource they have now is memory. Right? And if they don't remember anything, then the class falls apart. Right? And yet, there's a billion of pieces of information in this universe now available at our fingertips. We are in the 21st century, we're in Australia, we're not in Ethiopia, right? We've got books everywhere. We can organize those books. We can think of interesting ways of organizing books. We can also put some books, put some bits of books online in a database so that we can find things quickly by using a database. We can do lots of things to make use of 5 billion of resources available to Western people. Now we're gonna read one book forever to make sure that we get the students read. Yeah, no different than from the 19th century. And what actually the problem at the core is not pedagogy so much. At the core of this text, the problem is not pedagogy, but the concept of literacy. Once you remove the individual from your classroom and from your definitions, then everything is about templates. And oops, what goes with the templates? Goes creativity, goes away critical thinking, goes growing yourself, goes transformation, learning as a personal and social change. That's what they call transformative learning. Transformative means resulting in a profound change. How can it when everything becomes about abstraction and going through the hoops of the teacher? So once you remove the individual as a partaker and shaper of the culture, then what happens is your pedagogy then goes astray, because you don't know for whom you're actually teaching, and as a result you teach for some abstract outcomes, and that's when standardized testing goes astray, because you could do standardized testing where standardized tests for individual achievements, and you can set it up quite nicely. But if you remove teaching, if you remove from all your definition in an individual, then you teach towards abstract objectives, and you test abstract objectives, and there is no real impact. And that's what I wanted to say about literacy. So I produced this nice definition of literacy, but I didn't write it down, so hopefully some of you have. So what did I say? It is about we engage in literacy from the perspective of our own experience, and in order to fulfill a desired, to effect the desired outcome, right? And then once we actually engage in our literacy activity, once we actually send it out there for someone else to read or for other people to listen to or whatever, then we can observe the outcome, and then we can learn as a result. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to share with you. It's that concept of purpose and the concept of individual. You cannot have purposeful activity unless it actually has an individual in it. Otherwise, it's just basically streamlining people, telling them what to do, and making them do whatever they need to do so that you can get a positive feedback on your own definitions, right? As opposed to enabling them to actually meaningfully engage in the use of literacy science to the effect that they actually want to, for the purpose that they want to effect, and then they can assess how well they did, and the brain will learn. All right, friends. Well, I'm done for today. If you don't have any questions, we can close for today. All right. Thank you so much.